Hello everyone, welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. My name is Stephanie McCown and I'm so glad you're here. If this is your first time, welcome. This show is just about me talking about whatever happens to be on my mind while I do my makeup. The makeup really isn't the point. It's not a tutorial, so I'm not going to be going through step by step what I'm doing. But you might still find some things that might help you in your own makeup application. I don't know. But anyway, so before we get into today's topic, how was your Halloween weekend? Did you dress up and go out? My Halloween weekend Saturday was awesome. It was, they told us on the weather that it was going to be the last mild day of the year, so we enjoyed it. We had a bonfire, etc., etc. And then Sunday, oh yes, the rain and the snow started coming. And my son decided that he wasn't going trick-or-treating. And I don't know if it's because he has outgrown it. He is almost 13. Or if it's because he just didn't want to be out in the rain and snow. Although my son said that true Halloween weather is rain and snow. And if you don't get caught in the rain while you're out trick-or-treating, then it's not like an official trick-or-treat. So I don't know. I don't know what his reasons were, but he just decided he wasn't going to go. And I was a little bit sad because I didn't have a costume, but I did get to wear my costume to an event the previous weekend, so it's all good. All good. It was a fun weekend, though. I wasn't quite ready for the snow, I'll admit, but, you know, it is November. Can't believe it's November already. It is November, so I guess that it's time to suck it up, Buttercup, because here it comes. Anyway, so that is that. I hope you're doing really well so far today. Today has been neither here nor there for me. It's been an indifferent day, and I will take it, because it's a whole lot better than a bad day. Am I right? My lips are very dry, though. Hold on just a second. I cannot seem to keep enough moisture in this apartment. It's ridiculous. And that is why I don't like winter. One of the many reasons. Anyway, today's topic is one that I knew about only by name. I didn't know much about it in terms of like the history of the place. I didn't know a lot about it in terms of how it got its name, etc. I just knew I'd heard of the place. And that's it. And I thought, well, it's interesting enough to me that I'm going to do some research on it. And oh my goodness, once I started doing research on it, I was like, what? What? So, buckle up. Maybe you're familiar with the story, though. And you're going to be like, you're doing this all wrong. That's fine, too. But I'm just giving you a forewarning. So today we're going to be talking about Helltown, Ohio. Have you heard of this place? As I said, I had heard of it, but I didn't know a lot about it until I started doing some research. So before we get into the meat of the story, let's cover some few basic facts about Helltown, Ohio. First of all, it is not actually named Helltown, as you probably guessed. Helltown is actually a nickname given to a rural area of Ohio that is actually called collectively Boston Mills. It includes Boston Township, Boston Village, and a few other areas, but collectively it's known as Boston Mills. It was built, and for this we're talking about, I believe, Boston Village. It was built in 1806. The first mill was built in 1820. And the construction of the Ohio and Erie Canal brought in a lot of people. In this town, well, specifically Boston Village, mills flourished, particularly a paper mill, and it just became known for being a milling community. There was a railroad station that was built in the 1880s, and it was named Boston Mills to both honor Boston Village and the fact that it was a milling community, and that is why collectively now the area is just known in general terms as Boston Mills. Now the town is often and incorrectly said to be abandoned, and we're going to get into why that is in just a moment. But for 168 years, this town just lived its quiet life. It didn't attract a lot of attention. People were just glad to be there. It was one of those places that it was like, you know, we're keeping to ourselves. We're just glad to be alive here in Boston Village. And you know, it was just a rural community of people that loved their community and wanted to take care of their community. And that's what they did. This region is located in an area that is scenically absolutely gorgeous. And the people of this region really made an effort to keep it as natural as they possibly could. Like in their various townships and so forth, they would enact ordinances to, you know, prevent the construction of certain types of structures. They believed, you know, they kept it to single family homes. They just really, you know, and there could be arguments made that doing these things might have hurt people who didn't have the financial privilege to be able to live there, because I don't imagine it was expensive, or I mean inexpensive rather. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. The fact is that they liked their community. They wanted to keep it as close to, you know, natural as possible while still being able to enjoy it. And this was something that they took very seriously. Well, in the late 1960s, due to, I believe, the ignition of a river near Cleveland, Ohio, due to pollution, there was a movement growing nationwide calling for the preservation of forests and lakes and rivers and, you know, other natural environments. People were just like, listen, we're really tired of our rivers catching on fire. Once is one time too many. So let's do something about this. Now, in response to this, in 1974, President Gerald Ford signed legislation that allowed the National Park Service to take possession of, or to acquire land in order to expand or develop national parks or national preservation areas, recreation areas rather. Now, in this legislation, though, there was jurisdiction was given to the National Park Service that allowed them to acquire land from private landowners. And that meant also that if they had built homes on that land or other structures on that land, the National Park Service could, you know, basically use eminent domain and say, we're taking this land to expand this park or this recreation area that we're developing. And that was that. And I don't know how many people knew when the legislation was going through, like how many people in the public realized that that was part of the legislation, because the people in Cuyahoga Valley where this happened, they were excited. They were like, we are thrilled that you want to take this beautiful area that we have worked so hard to protect, and you want to make it into an area that can be enjoyed by everyone. We are in love with this idea. We couldn't possibly love it more. I don't think that people understood what that could mean for the private citizen, and I have once again put on too much foundation. This only happens when I'm on camera. I'm telling you, I don't normally do this. Anyway, so what could happen is the National Park Service could decide, hey, we like your property and we want it. Oh, do we want it? And once they decided that, there's really not a whole lot you could do. You couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't say no. You didn't have any real legal recourse to prevent them from taking your land, your home or your property. Now, what the National Park Service could do for you is they could offer you two types of mortgage or arrangements. One is called a fee title, and I believe I understand these correctly. Feel free to politely correct me if I'm explaining this wrong, but this is my understanding of it. Now, if the Park Service wanted your house or wanted your land, they were never after your house per se. They wanted your land, and you had a home on it, and you wanted to stay there, The Park Service had the option of saying to you, you know what? We like you. We like the cut of your jib. So here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to let you stay on your own land as a tenant of the U.S. government for the next 25 years. You can stay there for 25 whole years, basically renting your own property. Well, needless to say, a lot of people in this region were not going to be happy with that. They're like, you're inviting me to stay in an area that you are systematically buying up. You know, this is a community that you are causing to dwindle down to nothing, and you're saying that I can, as a tenant of yours, stay here on land that is mine for 25 years in a dying community. Thank you, but no thank you. And a lot of people who were offered that option understandably chose to leave. Now, another thing they could do, if the National Park Service felt so inclined, if you had a particularly beautiful piece of land, it had a gorgeous view, it had, you know, lots of the natural elements that the Park Service was looking for, the Park Service could offer you what was called a scenic easement. And what that meant is you could stay in your house, and I believe, once again, as a tenant of the U.S. government. Well, no, you weren't a tenant. You could stay in your house, but you had to agree that you were not going to change anything about your property. What that meant, it got very specific from what I understand. That meant what color you painted your house was not up to you. What sort of flowers and such that you grew in your own yard was not up to you. If you wanted to have a garden, the type of things you grew in your garden, those things were not up to you. They had to be something that the Park Service would say was, you know, native to the environment. Excuse me. And if it wasn't, they could tell you to you know, tear it out. You know, if you were growing crops, there were people who were farmers who were growing certain crops, and they were, you know, they took the option of the scenic easement, and the National Park Service was like, hey, thanks for taking up our offer. We really appreciate that. By the way, you can't grow your corn, so you're going to have to do something about that. So it wasn't as if being offered a scenic easement was like a big improvement over being offered a fee title arrangement. You were still under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. The government still had a lot of say in what you do on your own land. It was hardly ideal for anybody. There was nobody who was impacted by these arrangements that, you know, really got any kind of a sweet deal. It was just kind of, they screwed everybody. Now, most homeowners, as I mentioned, they ultimately decided to leave. Now, it's important to know, when the Park Service first went into the Cuyahoga Valley with the intention of building a recreation area, people were, as I mentioned, they were excited about this possibility. They loved where they lived, and they wanted to share it with people. They wanted people to be able to come there and enjoy the region that they loved so much. And the Park Service had told the residents, you know, we don't see us acquiring any more than maybe 30 of your homes. And the people in the region were like, well, you know, it might not be ideal, but if it's going to allow people to come in and enjoy this area the same way that we do, it's a sacrifice that we're willing to make. And people were just, you know, they were so proud of where they lived that they wanted to share it, and they wanted to make it accessible. And if that meant that some people needed to relocate, then, you know, that's something that collectively people in the area were willing to do. Well, the Park Service had said 30 homes. They ended up taking, through eminent domain, 300 homes. Now, this is not a densely populated community, okay? So having 300 houses taken by the National Park Service had a major impact on their community. I mean, this was not a small thing at all. It was basically killing the community. And as I said, once they decided they wanted your home or your property, that was it. You had no recourse. You could not say no. So people were leaving in droves. It's been described as basically a mass evacuation. That people, in 1974, between 1974 and 1975 was when the majority of the evacuation happened. And people were just leaving. And this town was basically emptying out of longtime residents. Now, it's important to understand some of these people, their families had been there for generations. These were not people who just moved here a few years ago and decided to set up house. A lot of these people had farms that had been in the family for generations. They had businesses they had built from nothing and become, very successful business people in the area. These were not small things, to have to leave all that behind because the government wanted your land. That was, I think for anybody, it would be difficult, but especially difficult if you're having to leave behind something that your ancestors worked for and built up and made what it was, and then the government was like, it's mine now. Sorry. See you later. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Once they took a home, the National Park Service would board up the house, and they would put no trespassing signs on it. They would put a padlock on the doors. Once that was done, you were not getting back into your home. You had to relocate. You had no choice. Now, what the Park Service would do is they would arrange for the home to be either completely demolished, or they would allow it to be burned down as a training exercise for local fire departments. Again, I couldn't imagine how that would feel to know that the house that perhaps your grandparents or great-grandparents built was going to be treated with such cold indifference, as just one more piece of debris that had to be dealt with, so before the park could expand. Now, unfortunately, what ended up happening is the Park Service bought up so many homes so fast that they couldn't keep up with the need to either demolish or burn down these homes. There were just so many for them to deal with that what ended up happening is you could go down a street, and on the same street you could see intact homes that were boarded up next to the remains of a burned out home. And that is part of the reason why, to this day, to the casual observer, it can look like this place is abandoned, that everybody just packed up and left. There are a lot of legends associated with Helltown because of these events. Now, I tried to find when the name Helltown first came into use, and I couldn't really find a definitive answer on that. But at some point, this place became known as Helltown, understandably so. And over time, a lot of legends have been developed, there have been a lot of legends that have come out about Helltown. A lot of urban legends, a lot of creepy stories. So let's go through some of those, and we're going to talk about what's true, what's not, and then we'll talk about what is going on there today. So one of the legends about Helltown is that it's haunted. And I think that's probably the biggest legend. Is people assume that Helltown is haunted, which I understand. There are a lot of abandoned houses there. I shouldn't say abandoned. There are a lot of, I don't like abandoned because it makes it sound like the people voluntarily just left. And I don't think there was much that was voluntary about it. So a lot of empty homes, a lot of unoccupied homes just standing there. And they haven't been occupied for a very long time. So they definitely have a very creepy feeling to them because, they're dilapidated, they're falling apart. So people assume going through there that number one, it's a completely abandoned place, and secondly, that it's haunted. It is not known to be haunted. People who have investigated there And by investigated, I mean primarily they visited there and took a look around. As far as I can tell, there has never been an intense investigation of this community. But people have visited there, very curious about what's actually going on, and did not report any major news of hauntings. So I think, as far as I can tell, from what I've read, the idea that it is a wildly haunted area is just simply not true. Another idea that persists, and this one is wild to me, so it's known by some as Mutant Town. Now, the reason for this is in 1985, the National Park Service acquired, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Kresge Dump. Anyway, it was a dump. And I don't know why the National Park Service acquired this, like what was the end game here, because I don't know how the National Park Service thought it was going to go acquiring a dump. I mean, did they have big plans for this dump? What was going on? But anyway, so what ended up happening was a lot of the park rangers who were patrolling this area, they started reporting feeling, that they were sick. They just did not feel well. And then the plot thickens. They started developing rashes. They would have rashes all over their body, and this prompted an investigation into, what was making these people so sick, what's going on here. And as it turned out, the dump was actually being used to illegally dump toxic waste, and it was being used by multiple companies to do this. And as of 2015, the site was still being cleaned up by the National Park Service. Anyway, so this led to the idea that there were mutant animals running around the area. And that is how Helltown also earned the name of Mutant Town. Now, it's also called Mutane Town. And that was interesting. And most people think that Mutane Town is just simply an erroneous spelling or whatever of Mutant Town. But there are also people who will swear to you that there was a butane factory in the area that exploded or something, and that is also contributing to the presence of these mutants. But there is no record of any such factory ever having existed in that region. So I think that is one legend about Helltown that we can safely say is simply the stuff of legends. There's not a lot of truth to it whatsoever. I did read that, and I'm going to mention this because I think it's important to call out erroneous reporting when you see it. There was an article I read that said that something they celebrate in the area called Python Day is because they believe in the presence of mutant pythons in the area. Where did all the pythons come from? I don't know. But anyway, so I read up on that. In fact, there is indeed a celebration called Python Day that happens, but it has nothing to do with these supposedly mutant pythons. It is actually something that dates back much further than any of this, and it's an old legend. I didn't read up on it. Once I saw that it had nothing to do with what I was looking into, I just kind of moved on. But anyway, so if you see somebody saying, yeah, they celebrate Python Day because there's a bunch of mutant pythons around there. No, that's not why they celebrate that. It's interesting when I do research on these stories, because there is always, always, always fact that needs to be separated from fiction. And especially in a story like this, where there are living people who can still tell the tale around. It's interesting to see what things have taken hold as fact that aren't fact whatsoever, and how easily actual fact is just blatantly disregarded. But that might be a video for another time. But what I am saying to you is I completely messed up my eye makeup, and you need to be a savvy consumer of media, because there is a lot of stuff out there regarding paranormal things and otherwise that just simply isn't true. I'm going to have to fix this, but that's okay. I will do that in just a moment. So another rumor that is persistent is that the Presbyterian Church in the town of Boston Village was actually founded. I think this is probably I don't think they use the correct word. Not founded by Satanists, but is actually used by Satanists. From what I could tell, that is also not true. The church was founded like most other churches are. It was founded by I'm guessing anyway, that, there was a group in the community that was like, hey, we need a Presbyterian church here. And the Presbyterian church people were like, hey, you know what? You do need a Presbyterian church there. And one was founded and pastored and people attended and et cetera, et cetera. And the National Park Service was like, hey, we really like your Presbyterian church. And you know what? We're going to have that. And people were like, no, don't take our church. And the National Park Service was like, nah, we're going to go ahead and do that. So, find somewhere else to worship. What has happened, though, is the church was broken into and it has been vandalized multiple times. Part of the vandalism is occultic symbols, satanic symbols. Now, this kind of reminds me of a story from when I was a kid. I was not a good child. I was kind of, really a bad child in so many ways. But when I was a kid, so I went to the church during the height of the Satanic Panic. And not just any church. I went to a Pentecostal charismatic church. And our church thought it would be a good idea. Oh, you foolish people. They thought it would be a good idea to tell the teenagers all about various satanic symbols, with the intention being that if we found them, we would know, oh, this is an area to stay away from, and I should probably tell my parents, and oh my gosh, they're Satan worshipers. And I think that was the intention. What actually ended up happening, though, was kids like me were like, that's good information to have. And I really was not a good kid. And kind of just decided that the thing to do was to harass substitute teachers by drawing up all these satanic symbols we had learned at church and leave them on the teacher's desk to find later. I don't know if there are any other Assembly of God kids who did this, but I definitely did it, and I didn't feel bad about it till many, many, many years later. And I just have to wonder now, like, what did these adults think was going to happen? I mean, you give a bunch of kids, especially kids like me, knowledge about satanic symbols. It's kind of naive on your part to expect that I'm going to use this information responsibly. I'm sorry. I did not use it responsibly, and I fully admit that. But I really felt bad, now that I think of it. I really do feel bad for the substitute teachers I had, because I was not a nice person. But anyway, so that was the fun I had with satanic symbols that I learned at church. Yay! So another rumor about Helltown is that there is a haunted school bus. Now, I've heard a couple things about the haunted school bus. The first one is, again, I believe, a measure or evidence of just lazy reporting. The first tale that I read about the school bus was that it was an abandoned school bus. All the seats had been taken out. That part is true. And it was occupied by the ghosts of people in Helltown who just didn't want to leave. Or maybe it was ghosts that didn't want to leave. That part was not clear. It's like, it said occupied by ghosts who never wanted to leave. And I'm thinking, but if it's a ghost, if indeed it is a ghost, ghosts, I would imagine, didn't have to leave, because ghosts can still occupy, they can still hang out on land where the homes used to be, right? I mean, I would think if they were tied to the region, they could just hang out where their houses used to be. And it didn't make sense to me that not wanting to leave the area meant hanging out in an abandoned school bus that meant absolutely nothing to them. I could not make sense of that, which is why it made more sense to me as I researched further that the legend is actually that the ghost is occupied by the spirit of a murderer who took it upon themselves to murder all the children who were on the bus's last journey. So apparently the legend is that this killer, like maybe the bus was stopped at the railroad, because school buses, when they reach the railroad tracks, they do have to stop. That's like the law, at least it is in Michigan. And they have to open the door, listen for the train, and then they can proceed. So I guess the legend is that this killer, when the school bus was stopped somewhere, boarded the bus and killed all the children, and now their spirit resides in this abandoned school bus that sits at the edge of the woods in Helltown, and it's, ooh, scary, scary. Well, the truth of the matter is much, much more boring. The truth of the matter is that a man and his family were living on the bus while their house was being renovated in one way, shape, or form, and they were living on this school bus while they awaited the opportunity to get back into their house. Very boring. It is not going to inspire many people to come look at Helltown and check out scary things, so people prefer to go with the scarier story, which is it's actually the spirit of a killer who occupies this bus. You know, I love legends as much as anybody. I really do. I appreciate them greatly for the entertainment value alone. But I do think that sometimes these legends are just so damn stupid that, you know, I mean, do a little research. Did you ever find an article saying that this murder happened, that this heinous crime happened? Because as far as I know, there is no record of such a crime happening in quiet little Boston Mills. But people find it easier to assume that it's true, because I guess it just makes their trip to Helltown that much more scary. Oh, let's see. We kind of covered the haunted abandoned houses already. Now, as I mentioned, there are several abandoned houses in the area. These are houses that the National Park Service took, and they didn't do anything with them. They're just still standing there. And I have to wonder, being that the purpose of taking the houses was to expand a natural recreation area, did they want like a permanent Halloween attraction, a permanent like haunted village to be part of the Cuyahoga Valley recreation area, or Cuyahoga Valley, I think it's just the Cuyahoga National Park now, but I mean, was that the plan? Now, even though there's no record of any actual hauntings of these homes, unfortunately, someone did apparently die by suicide in one of these homes in 2004. So there is the possibility that that person is still lurking around there somewhere. Don't know, because as I said, I don't know that there has ever really been an actual investigation in Helltown. And the reason for that, part of that is, you know, so I would imagine that if you live in a town that is primarily known for being haunted and spooky and scary, and you have all these people coming in all the time just to see how haunted and spooky and weird and scary it is, you're going to get sick of it. I know that when I did some research on Burkittsville, Maryland, which is a real place, you know, a lot of the locals who were interviewed for these articles that I read said that they were so tired of people coming to Burkittsville looking for the Blair Witch, who was never really said to actually exist. It was all part of a story created for, you know, the entire lore was created for the movie and the subsequent movies, and now a hunt-a-killer series and so forth. I mean, they've really gotten a lot of mileage off this Blair Witch thing. But anyway, so the point is, the people of these towns that people go to for the sake of just looking for spooky stuff, they probably get really tired of it. So I don't know that permission has ever been granted by anyone, let alone, I mean, you'd have to ask the National Park Service to go investigate in one of those abandoned houses if you wanted to do it safely and legally, which you should. If you're going to investigate a place, you should have permission to be there. Don't go onto people's private property and take it upon yourself to investigate there, because that's just all the way around not cool. But I can't imagine the locals are like, yes, definitely come to our village and make us really uncomfortable with your various paranormal investigations that are, of course, going to make more people want to come here and see how creepy our town is. We love it that you want to do that here. I don't imagine that's the case. Anyway, so the cemetery is also alleged to be haunted. Now, I am always skeptical of cemetery hauntings because ghosts tend to... people, dead or alive, tend to want to hang out in places that mean something to them, right? I don't know that there are a lot of people who would say the cemetery is so meaningful to me that this is where I want to hang out, like, for the rest of my life or my afterlife. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of cemetery hauntings, but that's might be just me. I don't know. But the legend is that there is a ghost that hangs out in the cemetery, and this ghost likes to sit on a bench in the cemetery and just stare off into the distance. I don't know how true that is. There is no bench in the cemetery. I read up on this. There is no bench in the cemetery, so therefore there is no bench for the ghost to hang out on and stare off into the distance. So that is another legend about Helltown that's been thoroughly debunked. Now, what has happened, though, because so many people do come to their area looking for all these creepy things they keep hearing about, the locals have started patrolling the cemetery, and they've installed floodlights so that if there are people lurking around in there at night, they're easily spotted, or at least more easily spotted. And the locals do not welcome these people that are just coming to poke around and, declare the place creepy and haunted and then leave. This is not a welcome thing, a welcome turn of events in their area. So, all of these rumors that you might have heard about why Helltown is so scary, you can research them without even going there. You can read the testimonials of people who have been there and find out, oh, that's not even true. Well, now I don't have to go down there and investigate the cemetery. Awesome. Let me see. So another rumor about Helltown is that it's abandoned. And as I mentioned earlier, it is not abandoned. There are still residents who live there. Not as many as before, not by far. There are about, give or take, 1,400 people that live in the area, in Boston Village, which I think when most people say Helltown, that's what they're referring to as Boston Village. And there is still a population of people who live there. I think what people find when they go there, though, is that people who live in Boston Village are extremely leery of outsiders, not because there's some weird stuff going on there, but because people who visit Helltown, tend to be there for reasons that are not going to reflect well on Helltown. They are there to declare Helltown creepy and scary and evil, and that's probably not the kind of publicity that locals want Helltown to have, so they're very skeptical. Now, I would say, having looked at pictures of this place, having read stories of people who've been there, Helltown is very much a scary place. Or, I shouldn't say scary, unsettling. It's an unsettling place. Because, yes, there are indeed a lot of abandoned houses. Yes, there are indeed burned out houses. There are definitely people who are leery of those coming in from the outside to look, to treat them like they are just a museum exhibit. But what is unsettling about Helltown is not that all these scary things are actually happening. It is that the people of Helltown were treated with such cold indifference by the U.S. government. I would imagine that there is still a heavy feeling of tragedy there. There is still a great sense of loss there. And I would imagine that feeling hangs heavy there to this day, because to this day it does impact, you know, these things that happened. We think they happened so long ago. I would imagine that the feelings that those events produced in people, even the people who stayed or the people who've since moved there, those feelings are still there, I would think. I'm a firm believer that land has memory. And I think that sometimes when you go to a place and you're like, I just walked onto the property or whatever, and, you know, it just felt so heavy there, it's because things happened there. And even though the people who were part of those things may have died or moved on, the land remembers. I firmly believe that. And I think that the land remembers what happened in that town. It remembers the grief. It remembers how hard people fought to keep what was theirs, and how unsuccessful they ultimately were, and how they had to abandon land that meant so much to them. And I think the land holds that energy. That's been my belief for decades now. And I think that part of why Helltown, you know, and I'm just theorizing here, but I would imagine part of why Helltown is such an unsettling place is because even if the people who are there still might be new to the area and were not part of the events that happened, or even if, you know, the people who are there are people whose homes were never ones under consideration by the National Park Service, it was still an extremely tragic event, and the land remembers. Now, this event was so tragic that PBS actually did a special about Helltown. It was called For the Good of All. It was a frontline documentary that they aired in 1983. And I highly encourage you to watch it if you're curious about what happened to this community, because it really did, you know, what the National Park Service did really did kill this community, and it changed it forever. And, you know, yes, the Cuyahoga National Park is beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. But it came at a heavy price. And, you know, the region never recovered from that. And I would imagine that is the source of the creepy feelings people have when they go there, not any sort of hauntings. Now, it's also important to note that what happened there was not unique. These kinds of things were happening to families all over the country because the National Park Service had been given jurisdiction to do this. They were told, you know what, we need land for these parks, go get it. And they did. I think Helltown, as far as I could tell, was maybe the place where it happened to the extent that it did. I mean, you know, buying up 300 homes in a community is a lot. But certainly the people in Boston Village and surrounding areas are not in any way, you know, what happened there was not unique. And it would be, I feel, irresponsible on my part not to, you know, to avoid pointing out, all right, one of the bits of graffiti on a house in Helltown is, now we know how the Indians felt. So if you're hearing this happen and you're thinking, you know, if this is the first time you've heard the story and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's tragic, these people worked so hard to build a community and then it was just ripped away from them. Well, it is by no means the first time the United States government has done that. And it happened to the indigenous people long before it happened to the people of Cuyahoga Valley for the purpose of expanding a park, or building a park rather. So I think that if you can find room in your heart and in your thoughts to have compassion for the people in this story, but you are of the belief that what happened to indigenous people is not relevant because it happened so long ago, I would challenge you to check your bias there. Because, you know, the people who were forced out of Boston Village and other areas, yes, they were able to rebuild elsewhere, but it didn't come easily. It cost them everything they knew, as far as, you know, their homes, their well-established businesses and so forth. And I can guarantee life was not the same for them after. Now, you know, it's also worth noting that the people who were forced to leave Helltown, I'm sorry, I can't talk and do this at the same time. Hang on. Okay, I think that's good. So the people who were forced to leave, you know, the Boston Mills region, they weren't robbed of their culture. They weren't told they couldn't speak their language and so forth. And that is also relevant to what happened to the indigenous people. This is Native American Heritage Month, and I think it's important to acknowledge that while we grieve these things that happen, you know, we read about things like what happened in the Boston Mills region, and we can recognize that tragedy and recognize how far-reaching that tragedy would be, and that to this day it still affects people. I think that, you know, we can find room to show some compassion for indigenous communities that were affected by things like this long before what happened in Cuyahoga Valley. Now, so after the National Park Service took all this property and burned it down or whatever, you know, obviously the residents of the area were complaining. They were not happy with this. Ultimately, the practices of the National Park Service in that area were investigated, and they were found to be far overreaching. And, you know, the person who was responsible for most of it, shortly after that decision came down, he actually passed away, which is just weird. But the new person that was put in charge there basically said, we're not giving anything back, but we'll commit to not acquiring any new homes and property from residents here. So, you know, that obviously was not going to be seen as a good enough solution. Ultimately, what ended up happening was they were offered, you know, residents were offered the opportunity to buy back their own homes and their land. You know, they were told, you can give back the money we gave you, and you know, you can buy back your stuff. You know, we're nice people like that. We're going to let you buy back your own things. For many of the people involved, they were like, well, you've already burned down my house. You've already burned down my barn and my other outbuildings that were on my property. Why would I want it back? You know, so it was just way too little too late. And, you know, the tragedy just compounded, I think, every effort that was made to, you know, make amends without really making amends. It just compounded the tragedy there. So it's a, you know, in what I've read about Helltown, yes, it is a place that has a lot of eerie feelings. It is a place that has just a heaviness to it. It is also a place where people do perform, unfortunately, they go there to perform various satanic rituals. And that is why, you know, legends like this, it's important to sort them out too, because when you allow these legends to fester without separating fact from truth, I can't imagine that the people of Helltown are like, I am so glad we have all these Satanists coming here to perform rituals. This just makes me so happy. So proud to live here. I can't imagine that's how they're reacting. And had these legends not been able to take root and had people just spoken facts, the residents of the Boston Mills area would not be subjected to the, you know, satanic tourists. I would also say too, Satanists that I know would never go into someone's town and terrorize them. They would never do things to make other people afraid in that way. So I'm reluctant to say that these are satanic rituals. They're satanic in that they are invoking Satan. They are not satanic in that they are typical of what Satanists do. I think that's an important distinction to make. Anyway, so that is Helltown. It is a place of tragedy. It is a place of tremendous loss. It is a place that I think can teach us something, and that if we can find compassion for the people who fell victim to the government in the 1970s, then I think we can find compassion for people who were victims of the United States government long before that, up to, through the 1970s and continuing today. I think that sometimes things have to happen in a certain way for us to see the whole picture. I think that probably for some people, they didn't really grasp what it would feel like to lose everything you worked for to the United States government and be forced off your own land until it happened to them. It's easy to think about things that happened to the indigenous people and think that, we're removed from it. It didn't happen to us. It didn't happen to my ancestors. It's something that belongs in the history books. When really, we know from looking at places like Helltown and other places where things like this have happened, the impact these events have on people are far-reaching and are felt for generations. These are not things that just go away. So that is something I'm going to ask you to consider if like so many people, myself included at one point, thought these things happened so long ago, they're part of history. They really don't have any impact today. I would invite you, if you are feeling a sense of empathy for the people of the Boston Mills region, for all that was taken from them, that you would evaluate your sentiments toward indigenous people who are still living with the trauma inflicted upon them by the United States government in taking away everything that was theirs and telling them, well, suck it up and move on. It's not quite so easily done. Not by any means. Thank you for being here with me today. I know that parts of this one were kind of a downer today, but I think it's important to talk about these things as they happened. Instead of just delving into all of the legends associated with an area, I think it's important to tell the truth. And I hope this has been an informative video for you. If you have any corrections or any further insights, I invite you to politely discuss them in my comments. If you get rude with me, I'm just going to delete your comments. And that's not about me being a snowflake. Excuse me, my goodness. That's not about me being fragile or a snowflake or anything else that people might want to say. It's about me setting boundaries, and I am under no obligation to tolerate being treated badly because I got a fact wrong or because you might disagree with my commentary. So just be polite, and I welcome discussion. Thanks for being here with me today. Thank you for tuning in and supporting me in all of this. I've been doing this for over a year, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. I don't have a ton of viewers, but that's okay. I have a good time with it. It gives me reason to research very interesting topics, and hopefully in discussing these topics, maybe giving people something to think about, maybe changing minds about a few things. That's my hope anyway. Have a great rest of your day. Be good to yourself, be good to each other, be careful out there because we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So just be wise in what you do and be thoughtful of others and protect yourself. And I will see you again probably next week. I have no idea yet what I'm going to talk about, but whatever it is, it will surely be something interesting. And I'll try to make it a fun topic next week. I'll do my best. Anyway, take care of yourself. I'll see you again soon. Bye.